Hello. I've decided to do something a little different here on Dark Hearts. I'm seeing a lot of AI-generated true crime content lately. Sometimes we're not even getting a human voice anymore. So I'm going to go in completely the opposite direction. The next 4 episodes are going to be formatted a little differently than before. They're going to be more cinematic, and I'm really going to lean into the storytelling aspect of the case. I am not a journalist. I am a storyteller. And I think the art of storytelling is going to become something we see less and less of in the future. So for the next 4 episodes, I'm going to need a lot of feedback. I want you to tell me how you feel about this new format. You know, you can be honest with me. I am always open for criticism, as long as you're not rude. Anyone who comes on my pages here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere, if you make a rude comment, you are blocked. I don't go back through my list every year and unblock people. You show me who you are, and I believe you. I watch out for you, my community members, and I do not want you seeing rude, mean, nasty things directed at me or at any other person here. And on top of that, I am just an old lady who ain't got time for bullshit. That said, I am always open for constructive criticism, and I need your feedback on these next 4 episodes. With that said, let's begin. Utah feels clean. The Wasatch Mountains guard the valley like silent sentinels, the streets are orderly, and mansions stand as monuments to the American dream. Gates locked, doors closed, sprinklers whispering in the dark. Families tucked safely inside, their wealth displayed in polished stone and glowing chandeliers in many neighborhoods. Now imagine one of those mansions, sprawling nearly 27,000 square feet, perched in the foothills of Sandy, Utah. $9 million worth of marble floors, carved staircases, and a pool shimmering under desert stars. It is a house that looks like success. A house that looks untouchable. But that house, prosecutors say, was more than a home. It was a front, a fortress built on crude oil, an empire accused of funneling nearly $300 million worth of stolen petroleum into the United States, enriching a cartel so violent, the government now calls it a terrorist organization. This is Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee, and today we are talking about the Jensen family. Mormon elder, cartel member. Let's begin. James Lael Jensen, his wife Kelly, and their sons are a family who wears respectability like armor, a family who thought wealth and pedigree could shield them, a family now accused of running a black gold pipeline straight into the heart of cartel violence. To understand the Jensen family, you must first understand James. He was born in the mid-1960s and raised in the Utah that prides itself on faith, industry, and self-reliance. James wasn't loud. He wasn't the type to draw attention. Instead, he built a reputation as a man who knew the oil business. Not the glamorous side, but the corporate boardrooms, the logistics, the nuts and bolts, the shipping, the purchasing, the invisible details that make crude oil flow from the ground into engines. By the late 1990s, James Jensen had worked in several petroleum ventures. He was sharp, ambitious, and knew how to structure deals that looked legitimate, even when the lines blurred. He understands permits, trucking, the gray areas of fuel classifications, and he was the type of man that cartels look for, someone who could make dirty oil look clean. In 2011, James' talent found a stage. He established Arroyo Terminals in Rio Hondo, Texas. On paper, Arroyo was boring. It purchased waste oil, leftovers, slop, the unusable scraps of refining. But in reality, prosecutors allege, Arroyo's tanks filled with fresh crude siphoned directly from Pemex pipelines in Mexico. The shipments rolled in relentlessly, tanker trucks crossing the border, paperwork calling it waste. But the contents were liquid gold. Nearly 2,900 shipments in 3 years worth of gold. Each one a vein in a pipeline of theft, laundering, and cartel profit. James returned to Utah often, retreating into this sandy mansion where the lawns were manicured and the neighbors knew nothing. To them, he was respectable, a man of business, a man of faith, a family man. But prosecutors say every chandelier in that mansion was lit by stolen oil. And then there was Kelly. To the outside world, Kelly Jensen was everything a Utah matriarch should be. Polished, gracious, a mother who appeared at church, at charity luncheons, at community events, and her pedigree sealed her aura. Kelly Jensen is the daughter of Carlene Walker, a respected Utah state senator known for her work on public safety and transportation policy. Politics in Utah is about trust and reputation and legacy and very closed circles. And Kelly carried that with her like a halo. She and James were seen as stable, successful, even enviable. Their home was a showpiece, their children well-dressed and well-educated. But the legal indictment that was to come did not spare Kelly's name. In April of 2025, Kelly stood accused alongside her husband and sons. Prosecutors argued that Kelly wasn't just a bystander, that she helped launder money, shifted accounts, and lent legitimacy to the operation. Though charges against Kelly Jensen were later dismissed without prejudice, the stain remains. Dismissal without prejudice is not an acquittal. It is a warning. It means the government can return at any time with sharper evidence, and Kelly's name can once again appear in bold print on the indictment. For a woman raised in politics who wore reputation like silk, the collapse of public image was a sentence in itself. Kelly's life of charity events and polished dinners was gone. Now she was a name in federal court filings. Her mansion, a crime scene. Kelly's father, Gordon Walker, served in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under President Ronald Reagan. Though not a household name in Utah, within federal circles, Gordon Walker was known as a steady hand, an administrator trusted to navigate the complexities of federal housing programs during a politically transformative era. Under the Reagan administration, HUD was tasked with reorienting social programs toward privatization and local control, while still safeguarding the nation's most vulnerable communities. Gordon Walker played a background role in steering policy that balanced budget cuts and regulatory shifts with the need to maintain affordable housing across U.S. cities. Boy, it sounds like we could really use Gordon right now. To Kelly, her father's career was more than professional. It was foundational. She grew up in a household where public service wasn't optional, it was familial. Policy discussions over dinner centered not on profit margins or partisan politics, but on program implementation and community impact. Those conversations shaped Kelly's worldview, setting the stage for her own public-facing prominence later in life. We don't have a lot of families like this in Utah. This is not Southern California. We have some big and powerful people, but not many, and very few this rich and this powerful. Kelly's mother, Carlene Walker, took public service a step further into the public eye. Carlene Walker was elected to the Utah State Senate in 2000 and served 2 terms from 2001 to 2009, representing District 8 in Salt Lake County. During her tenure, she was known for championing transportation, public safety, and DUI reform legislation. She rose in prominence swiftly. She didn't just serve, she led. Among Kelly's mother's roles, Carlene chaired the Senate Transportation Public Utilities and Technology Committee and the Retirement and Independent Entities Committee, positioning her at the nexus of infrastructure planning and state governance. Carlene Walker's policy contributions included advocacy for improved traffic safety, education outreach, and more robust funding for Utah's transportation networks. These are issues that affect everyone who lives in that area. Carlene Walker visited classrooms, explained the legislative process, and personified the idea that government could be accessible and transparent. In a state where politics often skated atop consensus, Carlene brought substance and dignity. Her leadership was a model of woman-made influence in Utah's male-dominated political tapestry. So Kelly Jensen came of age amid two contrasting yet complementary legacies: federal bureaucracy prudence from her father and dynamic state-level policymaking from her mother. In public events and community gatherings, Kelly was often seen alongside her parents, her posture an elegant blend of their influences. She listened patiently to elders, smiled thoughtfully at policy handouts, and wore her family's reputation with a quiet confidence. It's a little difficult to imagine a woman like this being handcuffed and having a mugshot taken. It's easy to imagine young Kelly learning lessons early, the importance of trust in governance from her father, and the necessity of constituent connection from her mother. She used that knowledge when she later stepped into roles of her own: charitable functions, social events, philanthropic boards, and she did so backed by two legacies that implied integrity and public-mindedness. I've posted about this story on TikTok and Instagram, and there is a very mixed reaction from commenters. One side of the table says, well, duh, this is happening in Utah. Of course everyone's crooked there. The other side of the table says, it doesn't matter that they're Mormon. It doesn't matter they're from Utah. There are bad people everywhere. Neither side is wrong, but I can promise you that some Mormons, not all, will be the first to say things like, well, I'm LDS, I have higher standards. I'm LDS, I don't drink alcohol. I'm LDS, I don't drink coffee. There is a moral superiority whipped out in a flash for some Mormons who then want to turn around and say, it doesn't matter that someone's Mormon if they do something bad. You can't have it both ways, brothers and sisters. That's what Mormons call each other. You don't get to pull the Mormon card for moral superiority and then ignore the Mormon card when someone does something underhanded or criminal. In Utah's social fabric where politics and community intertwine deeply, Kelly Jensen's lineage lent the family a halo. This halo broke when the headlines appeared in April of 2025 and turned the family from glow to glare. It's here that the story becomes tragic. A woman raised on policy and public trust, linked by blood to two respected public servants, now finds her name mired in a federal racketeering case. Her polished pedigree of government service now stands in stark contrast to the allegations of cartel financing and smuggled oil. Yet that contrast is what makes the Jensens' downfall so cinematic and so quietly ruinous. The Jensens have two sons who grew up in privilege. Joshua Max Sterling Jensen, just 25 years old, had the kind of upbringing most kids only dream of: expensive schools, family vacations, the certainty that his father's empire would one day become his. He was bright, ambitious, restless. Prosecutors say he was also deeply involved in the logistics of Arroyo terminals. Witnesses describe Max on the ground, directing shipments, moving paperwork, helping coordinate the daily pulse of oil flowing through the Texas facility. Court documents tie Max to misleading statements, laundering proceeds, even providing material support to a terrorist organization. These are charges that carry decades in prison. Max wasn't portrayed as a naive heir. He is portrayed in the court documents as an apprentice in crime. His brother, Zachary Golden Jensen, was different, less visible, quieter, but still initially charged. By the way, Golden is a very common name here in Utah, dates way back to the pioneer days. Zach's role in this alleged crime is murkier. Some said he stayed in Utah. Others said that he occasionally traveled south. His charges were dismissed without prejudice, leaving him in limbo, perhaps just waiting for another wave of evidence to drag him back under. What is clear is that prosecutors saw the sons not as innocents, but as participants. The Jensen dynasty was a family business, and oil was the inheritance. But no matter how wealthy, no matter how well connected, crime leaves a trail, and this one began in Mexico. Pemex, Mexico's state-owned oil company, has been bleeding crude for years. Cartel groups called huachicoleros drill into pipelines, sometimes with nothing more than a blowtorch and a hose. They siphon oil by night, often spilling it into soil, streams, or streets. Entire villages have exploded when a single spark ignited a tapped pipeline. This theft costs Pemex billions annually. It fuels black market corruption and violence. By the mid-2010s, cartels realized crude was safer than cocaine. Oil wasn't sniffed by dogs. It wasn't tested at the borders. It was shipped in trucks and tankers like any other commodity. With forged paperwork, this stolen oil slid into legitimate markets unnoticed. And in Rio Hondo, Texas, Arroyo terminals became one of the gateways. Prosecutors argue that the Jensens were not passive receivers. They were the ones who gave stolen crude oil a mask, labeled it as waste oil, and pushed it into the bloodstream of the American economy. It wasn't just fraud, it was cartel funding. And the cartel in question, the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, had by then grown into one of the most violent organizations in the world. RPGs against helicopters, mass executions, citizens terrorized. By February 2025, the U.S. government officially labeled CJNG a foreign terrorist organization, which meant any American accused of helping them wasn't just a smuggler, they were accused of providing material that supports terror.
Officers on the scene.
On April 23, 2025, the raids came at dawn. In Sandy, Utah, the neighborhood was still. Then a rumble of black SUVs, tactical vans, agents in body armor came like a black parade. They didn't knock. They didn't ring the bell on the mansion doors. The battering ram slammed against the Jensen gates, splintering wood and steel. Shouts echoed, federal agents, search warrant. Neighbors peeked from windows as teams poured in, rifles raised, boots pounding the marble floors. The mansion was stormed like a fortress under siege. The image of the perfect Utah family cracked like glass. At the same moment, hundreds of miles south, Arroyo Terminals was seized. Oil barges idled in confusion, tanker trucks lined up, drivers were pulled aside for questioning, employees swore they didn't have information, but manifests told another story. Paperwork had been falsified, barrels labeled as waste glistened with pure crude. The seizure list was staggering: 4 oil tank barges, 3 tanker trucks, the Rio Hondo terminal property, millions in accounts, vehicles, even secondary properties in Wyoming. Prosecutors wanted it all. James, Kelly, Max, and Zachary were in custody, and the courtroom became the next battlefield. The detention hearing was tense. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Eugene Hess argued the crude oil could only have come from theft. I find it interesting, and I haven't been able to verify this, that the U.S. attorney prosecuting this has a last name of Hess. As I've said before, Jason worked in the oil field for 5 years, and if you know anything about oil, you know the name Hess. I haven't been able to verify a connection, but we will be talking about this story again in the future. Hess laid out the charges, and he warned the judge of the Jensen family ties abroad, their assets, their mansion, their resources. Hess said James Jensen was a flight risk, that a man with that much wealth and this much to lose could vanish. Defense counsel pushed back. The Jensens, he argued, were deeply rooted in Utah, Mormon churchgoers, a respected family. They weren't violent. They weren't cartel enforcers with rifles. They would show up in court. Locking them up before trial would be unjust. The judge listened, weighed, and finally ordered their release. It came with conditions: GPS monitors strapped to ankles, travel limited, and a mandatory appearance in Brownsville, Texas by May 8th. But prosecutors had another weapon: forfeiture. They filed motions to seize $300 million in assets: the house, the barges, the trucks, every dollar or asset linked to oil. These attorneys wanted to dismantle not just the business, but the family's legacy. Assistant U.S. Attorney Alamdar Hamdani said it simply, quote, "Whether you hand a cartel a gun or hand them money, the result is the same. You fuel terror. The defense filed counter motions. They argued that Pemex, not the U.S., was the victim, that applying terrorism charges stretched the law beyond its intent. Defense attorneys painted James Jensen as a businessman trapped in the bureaucracy of international trade. But with every motion, prosecutors hammered back. This was theft. This was fraud. This was the support of terrorism. Outside the courtroom, law enforcement leaders spoke to the press. Craig Larrabee of ICE and Homeland Security said this case showed how unscrupulous American businesses enable terror. DEA Special Agent William Kimball noted that the oil had become Cartel's largest funding source after drugs. It's clean, it's profitable, and it's hidden in plain sight. The community in Utah was stunned. Neighbors who once attended barbecues at the Jensen mansion now whispered about raids and terrorism charges. The mansion became a symbol not of wealth, but of deceit. The family name, once cushioned by politics and privilege, was dragged through mud. In Mexico, Pemex continues to bleed. Pipelines are tapped, villages are endangered, and billions are lost. Fires erupt when crude oil is spilled, and cartel coffers still swell. The Jensens, prosecutors said, were a crucial link in that chain. Utah respectability masking cartel violence. Suburban family dinners feeding a terror machine thousands of miles away. For James, the trial ahead looms like a shadow over the rest of his life. For Kelly, the stain of suspicion will never wash clean. For Max, prison years stretch like a horizon. And for Zachary, the sword of re-indictment dangles over his head. And I just had a thought hit me. I'm going to stop for just a moment. One of my strongest criticisms of the Mormon Church, and I have many, is that it has more money than Apple, than Microsoft, than any other church in the world times 1,000. And it does not use that money to end homelessness or hunger, not even for children. Church members will tell you that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is very involved in charity work and donates a lot of money. By the church's own admission, it has donated over the last 50 years less than 1% of its wealth. As a member of the church, you have to donate 10%, but the church itself has donated less than 1% of its massive wealth. The criticism that goes with that information is this: when the church does do charity, it is very much hands off. There are Mormon vending machines placed all around the state of Utah, especially at Christmas time. I'll put a picture up now, where you go and put money into the machine and the church organizes some sort of effort for delivery of goods. Why are members still being asked to give when the church has $280 billion? And that's a conservative estimate. Where are the homeless shelters? Where are the domestic violence shelters? Where are the orphanages? In the Mormon Church, and I can say this as a born and raised member who did not start to figure everything out until I was about 35, there is very much a mentality of not touching the unwashed masses. There are events at the church where the women will gather and put together hygiene packs. So someone will bring a case of toilet paper. Someone will bring a case of toothpaste. Someone will bring a case of combs. And they package it all up and bundle them into these hygiene packs. I'm not saying that's not a good thing to do, but it's then bundled up and shipped off. Where are the orphanages in those poor countries? Where are the soup kitchens in those poor countries? It is very much a faith without works is dead, so let me do some works without actually having to do some works. Now, of course, this is a generalization. There are Mormons that get more involved. And then there are Mormons that like to look like they're helping when they're not. Man panties. And lordy, have I got a story for you on Thursday. It's Utah week here on the channel. But as I sat and thought about the Jensens, it is very, I don't think ironic's the right word. They're living in this perfect mansion on the hill, while the violence that they are alleged to be involved in, helping to cause, is taking place, hundreds of miles away, 1,000 miles away. And it is very similar to the Mormon mentality of helping without actually helping. Donating by going to the church on a Saturday, having a nice lunch, putting together hygiene packs, but not ever actually going to the countries or making sure that something like, an orphanage is built, demanding that a school is built. What's happening in those shithole countries, not my words, don't be mad at me, is their problem. And we, with the white savior complex, come in and do what we can to help. And here we've got a man very steeped in that same culture that is hurting people a long ways away, people in underdeveloped and underserved areas, and he's getting rich off of that. But it doesn't matter to him because he's not seeing it firsthand. He's not touching it. Yeah. You know me, sometimes thoughts pop into my head and I have to go off script for a moment. Some things might be changing here at Dark Hearts, but one thing that will never change is my rants. But here we've got this family that looks like the pillars of the community on paper, and their attorney kept insisting to the court that James and Kelly were active in their church. Now, that is code for they're one of us, and they are deeply tied to the community. Whenever you hear they're active in the church in Utah, that means they're good Mormons. They're one of us. And the Jensen defense attorney also told the judge that they are a stalwart Utah family. In Utah, words like those carry weight. Those are not just empty lines here in Utah. Utah is its own little world. Words like that in a courtroom mean that you're part of the fabric of the valley. You don't just live behind a gate, you belong there. Sandy, Utah is a suburb of Salt Lake. It's connected to Salt Lake. The owner of New Skin lives in Sandy. I have a relative who is third or fourth in line at New Skin. He lives in Sandy. His family lives in Sandy. I think the owner of the Utah Jazz lives in Sandy. Larry H. Miller lived in Sandy. This is a very, very wealthy community up on the hill, and then it's a regular town everywhere else. Overwhelmingly middle class, but it is also overwhelmingly Mormon, in a state that is becoming less and less Mormon all the time. This is a place where neighbors share gardens, where PTA meetings fill on weekends, where people know each other's children by name. In Sandy, Utah, reputation is currency, and the Jensens had plenty of it. For years, the mansion loomed like a castle above the valley floor. Locals knew of it. You couldn't miss it. 27,000 square feet of stone and glass, but very few ever saw the inside. To many people, the mansion is just another sign of Utah's booming wealth, an untouchable estate owned by a family with connections, politics, and success. And this is part of the reason that the raid in April of 2025 landed like a thunderclap. One person close to all of this is speaking anonymously. This person has told the media that the U.S. Marshals did not knock politely. Like I said, they came with a battering ram. They broke down gates and doors. They broke glass. They moved with force, as though the Jensen mansion wasn't a home at all, but a fortress in enemy territory. Here in Utah, where crime is often thought of in terms of burglary or fraud, the sight of heavily armed federal agents storming a suburban estate is surreal. One neighbor told reporters off camera, of course, that it looked like a war zone. Another described it as a movie scene. And while few are willing to give their names, the shock echoed through Sandy. Families whispered at church. Parents traded speculation at school pickups. Everyone knew something huge had happened, and it wasn't the kind of crime that anyone expected from a family like the Jensens. For the defense, this was the strongest card to play. They told the judge, "Look at who they are. These are people with roots. They're not cartel gunmen. They're not going to flee. They're embedded in Utah life, church, community, civics." And on the surface, that was true. The Jensens had every trapping of belonging. But the prosecutors countered with what they said was reality. The belonging was a mask, and beneath it lay oil, money, and cartel bloodlines. For the people of Sandy, the shock was twofold. First, that federal agents had battered their quiet neighborhood awake with a raid. And second, that the family who had seemed so anchored in community was suddenly being called something darker. You can't find a neighbor willing to say much about James Jensen on the record, not because there's nothing to say, but because when cartel ties are in the mix, people get quiet. Fear spreads quickly. And yet, in the silence, there is an echo. The image of church pews with the Jensens sitting shoulder to shoulder with their community, the memory of a family who looked the part, played the role, and built a life designed to signal legitimacy. It's a reminder that appearances, especially in Utah, can be deceiving. That behind stone gates and manicured lawns, there can be secrets worth battering down doors to uncover. And the mansion itself likely to be stripped, seized, and sold. A palace turned evidence. So what do you call a family who built their fortune on black gold, who wore respectability as disguise, who allegedly funneled millions to a cartel known for terror? You call them complicit. Because oil flows. lies coagulate, and eventually the pipeline always ruptures. And when it does, it doesn't just stain those who built it, it stains everything it touches. Thank you for joining me today on the first episode of what may become the new format here on Dark Hearts. I'm really anxious to hear your feedback on not only the story, but on the new format. This is my podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. I post brand new episodes every Monday and Wednesday, and there are some podcast exclusives, stories that you will not see here on YouTube. We're very close to hitting 2 million downloads in just 7 months, so yeah, the podcast is doing gangbusters. I want to give a special thank you to my patrons. As always, your support means the world to me, and you're the reason that I'm still here on YouTube. Please don't forget about our fundraiser. We are so close to having the first $750 needed to donate to a police department. I keep thinking I'm just going to throw in the rest. I've already thrown in a little, I'm not going to lie. And maybe I still will because I'm just so anxious to get going on this. We're going to pick a cold case that has DNA associated with it. We're going to pay to get that DNA kit tested, and hopefully we will help solve the crime. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I love it when you spend a little bit of your day with me. I look forward to talking with you in the comments. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.